In the world of the Vikings, a man's reputation was everything. Strength, honor, and courage defined not just personal worth, but legal standing, social ties, and even survival. And yet, there was one word, just one, that could take it all away. That word was argr. It wasn't a simple insult like coward or weakling. To be called argr, translated as unmanly, effeminate, or morally deviant, was to face social annihilation. Among the Norse, masculinity wasn't just a cultural expectation. It was law. It was spiritual order. In the Icelandic legal codes, like the medieval Gragas, argr wasn't used lightly. It was an official accusation with devastating consequences. Viking society had clear ideas of what made a man honorable: bravery in battle, loyalty to kin, mastery of survival. Anything outside that frame was dangerous. Calling someone argr meant accusing him of behaviors considered shameful: cowardice, sexual passivity in same-gender relations, or even practicing forbidden magic called seidr. That last one mattered more than you'd think. Seidr was a form of Norse sorcery, often practiced by women. But for men, it was a stain on honor. Even the gods weren't immune. In the Ynglinga saga, Snorri Sturluson tells how Odin himself was mocked for using seidr. It was said to be so unmanly that men could not deal with it without shame. For an ordinary man, though, the consequences were far worse. Calling someone argr was known as nid, a deeply dishonorable slur, but also a legal challenge. Under Viking law, a man accused in this way had two options. He could ignore it and face ruin, or he could defend his honor through holmgang, a ritual duel. And make no mistake, ignoring the challenge wasn't an option. In the cold logic of Norse society, silence was the same as confession. If the accused didn't fight back, he was guilty by default. And what awaited a guilty man was not prison, not even simple exile. It was something colder, darker, more final. He would be declared outlaw, an outlaw. To most modern ears, that word might sound romantic, like a rogue or rebel, but for the Norse, outlaw meant legal death. A man outside the law, not protected, not remembered, not mourned. In Viking Iceland, a man declared outlaw could be killed by anyone, anywhere, at any time. And no one would face punishment for it. For a Viking man, being declared outlaw, was a sentence beyond death. But there were degrees to that punishment. There was Fjorbaugssgarda, lesser outlawry, lasting 3 years. It gave a man a thin hope: survive in exile, commit no further crimes, and maybe return someday. But for the truly condemned, there was skoganga, the walk into the forest. Skoganga wasn't exile. It wasn't even banishment. It was social and legal erasure. When a man was sentenced to skoganga, he wasn't simply told to leave town. He was stripped of every right. No kinship ties, no legal protections, no right to shelter, food, or fire. No family member could offer him aid without risking their own standing. From that moment on, he was nidinga, a dishonored man cut off from the human world. The punishment was recorded clearly in Gragas, the medieval Icelandic law code. If a man stood accused of unmanliness, argr, and failed to defend himself, skoganga awaited him. Outlawry wasn't about rehabilitation. It wasn't about justice as we might understand it today. It was about purging. To protect the social fabric, the dishonored man had to vanish completely. In the sagas, skoganga is more than a sentence. It's a death by isolation. Take the story of Greta Asmundarson from Grettis saga. Condemned to outlawry, Greta fled into the wild, surviving for years among the harsh landscapes of Iceland. Dark forests, stone-cold fjords, snow-locked hills. But the longer he stayed away from people, the more he unraveled. His mind decayed. His strength waned. His soul, once proud, turned bitter and hollow. This was no accidental fate. Viking law had designed skoganga as a slow execution by nature and memory. Because survival wasn't enough. Even if an outlaw lived for years in the shadows, his name was as good as dead. No songs would be sung about him, no rites performed. His ancestors would turn their backs, and his descendants would speak of him only in shame, if they spoke of him at all. Skoganga was less about killing a man's body and more about killing his place in the world. In Norse belief, a man lived on through memory, through story, through his bloodline. To be sentenced to skoganga was to be condemned not just to die, but to disappear. When a Viking man was declared outlaw, he didn't just fade quietly into the woods. He became a target. Unlike modern systems where criminals are imprisoned or fined, Norse law placed the burden of punishment on the community. A man outside the law was no longer just abandoned. He was marked for death, and not just by enemies or rivals. Anyone could kill an outlaw, friend, stranger, even a family member. The legal codes made it terrifyingly clear: he who kills an outlaw shall not pay wergild. Wergild was the compensation owed for a killing under normal circumstances, a kind of blood price. But for an outlaw, there was no price, no debt, no consequence. Killing an outlaw wasn't murder, it was civic duty. That's why the sentence carried such final weight. Outlawry wasn't about leaving society, it was about society turning against you. A man labeled argr had already been judged as corrupt, morally polluted. His so-called unmanliness, whether through sorcery, passivity, or cowardice, was seen as a threat to the fabric of Viking life. Allowing such a man to live wasn't mercy, it was dangerous. That's why, even in sagas, the outlaw often doesn't last long. The wilds of Iceland might offer cold shelter, but sooner or later, a hunter would come. A neighbor seeking honor, a kinsman hoping to cleanse family shame, or simply someone looking for profit. Because in some cases, a killer could even claim the outlaw's property. Houses, livestock, weapons, whatever was left behind. The law didn't just permit this, it encouraged it. Once declared outlaw, a man's humanity was stripped away piece by piece. No home, no name spoken in public, no rights upon death. Even Odin's name meant the Furious One. Honor and rage were tied together in the Viking mind. To be a man was to fight, to defend, to belong. The man who failed that, through weakness, shame, or argr accusation, lost his right to exist. Imagine, one morning you stand at the center of the thing, the Viking assembly. Someone calls you argr. You don't answer the challenge. By nightfall, your kin have disowned you. By dawn, men are hunting you. You flee into the mist, a ghost before your body is even cold. In Viking society, a man's worth wasn't measured by wealth alone. It was measured by name, lineage, and legacy. To live well was important, but to be remembered well, that was everything. This is why the punishment of argr carried a weight even beyond outlawry or death. It could erase a man from history. Unlike a fallen warrior whose name would be carved into stone or sung in the halls long after he was gone, a man branded nidinga, dishonored, was deliberately forgotten. His name would be left out of family genealogies, his place in the bloodline erased. This wasn't an accident or oversight, it was a conscious act of social survival. In a culture where kinship defined legal rights, marriage prospects, inheritance, even voting at the thing, being related to a dishonored man was a liability, a stain that could last for generations. That's why Icelandic family sagas sometimes break their chains of ancestry without explanation. Scholars notice names missing, bloodlines abruptly cut short. These silences weren't mere gaps in memory, they were acts of protection. If your ancestor had been accused of argr and failed to clear his name, your family had a choice: keep his memory and suffer for it, or cut him loose, erase him forever. For many, the choice was simple. To remember an argr man was to risk your own children's future. Land ownership, alliances, even basic respect depended on showing a clean lineage. So families disavowed, disowned, denied. Not only would no one visit the outlaw in the woods, no one would speak of him again. In Viking belief, this was a kind of second death, worse than physical destruction. To die once in the body, then again in the mind of your kin. As the old poem Havamal warned, cattle die, kinsmen die, you yourself die the same way. But a noble name will never die if good renown one gets. For those labeled argr, even that hope was lost. No noble name, no saga, no song, just silence. In Viking lore, honor wasn't just about bravery or skill with a sword. It was a carefully guarded social currency, woven from strength, loyalty, and an unyielding vision of manhood. That's why a single word, argr, could unleash such destruction. It wasn't about individual weakness, it was about protecting the order of things. A man accused of being unmanly wasn't seen as simply different, he was seen as dangerous. A threat to family ties, legal trust, and even spiritual balance. So the Norse system answered in kind. Nid, the slur that started the fall. Holmgang, the duel that could save or condemn. Utlaga, the outlaw sentence that made a man a target. Skoganga, the final walk into the forest. And finally, the erasure from memory itself. For modern readers, it may seem brutal, but within Viking society, this was how honor was maintained, by setting the clearest possible boundary between those who belonged and those who did not. What's striking is how much of that thinking still echoes today. We may not declare outlawry in the literal sense anymore, but societies still decide who deserves protection and who does not, who is remembered and who is forgotten. The idea of unmanliness as something punishable isn't locked in history books. It survives in modern judgments. Who gets excluded from a group? Who gets cancelled? Who is left off family stories and legacy walls? In subtle and not so subtle ways, echoes of Viking nid resurface whenever masculinity becomes a gate that must be guarded. So when we read the sagas or study the old laws, the question lingers: what are the modern words that carry the same weight as argr once did? What accusations today can still exile a person, not just from legal standing, but from memory, community, and even family? As the Havamal reminds us, cattle die, kinsmen die, and so one dies oneself. But a noble name will never die if good renown one gets. Unless, of course, society chooses to forget.